I'm going to try to give you some advice from my perspective about how to pick what you want to do. These are my disclosures here. And I'm going to start by telling you a story, and it might be real, might not be. So Jane is a 32-year-old rising star. She's got all the bona fides. She went to a high-powered radiology residency and an abdominal fellowship program. She volunteered in multiple countries during medical school, was a national collegiate athlete. Some say she was just shy of being an Olympian. She has 4 first-authored papers on novel machine learning algorithms that many believe are on the cusp of being translated into clinical care. And she has a winning attitude. Her cabinet is stocked with a who's who of mentors and sponsors. And after her last scientific presentation, 4 division directors from top 10 institutions came up to her specifically to say, I would love for you to come and apply for a position in our faculty. Does this sound like anyone in the audience, by the way? Just raise your hand if that's you. No? Okay. All right. But, Jane stresses, and everyone keeps telling her that she is the envy of the world, and her academic career is starting in the stratosphere, but she's a little uncertain. Yesterday, she got an official job offer from a prestigious institution to be on the fast track to academic stardom, but she's not sure whether to accept it. I'm going to describe the terms of the proposal to you, and I want you to think about whether you would take it or whether Jane should take it. It would require her to highly subspecialize in GI radiology. She would have to abandon most of her other clinical skills, and she would spend 50% of her effort pursuing grants. And if she takes it, she's been pretty much assured that her career is solidified and nothing will stand in the way of her success. Okay, so that's the framework, that's the job offer. I'm going to advance the slide here, and this is just a question. If you all have your audience response things, it'll make it more fun. So I want you to think about what Jane should do. Should she take the job? Should she negotiate for higher pay? Should she negotiate for more protected time? Should she decline the job and find a different academic post, or decline the job and enter private practice, or F, how in the world do I know what she should do? So go ahead and pick one of those. And this kind of question is probably not dissimilar to the offer letters you might get, where someone's going to give you a job description, how much protected time if you're in academics, or how much vacation time if you're in private practice, what your case volume is going to be, how much they're going to pay you. Okay, this is amazing to me. 12 people said they don't know. And there's a lot of people who actually have given Jane very specific advice to do something. And Jane is not only a fictitious character, but you don't know Jane, but you're giving her very specific advice about what to do, and I think that's interesting. From my standpoint, I have no idea what Jane should do, and I would argue that probably none of us have an idea what Jane should do, and I'll explain what I mean in a minute. When we're making complex decisions, how should we figure out what to do? Here's my opinion. I think we should start, before we ever get to the point of having to make the decision, think to yourself, what are my core values, what are my principles, and what are my ideals? If you've not spent any time in your whole life thinking about these things, I'm going to give you a small homework assignment that'll make your life easier. Go home, or take some time this afternoon, and just write them down. Okay? Just write down what you value. So when something comes up that's complicated, and you're presented with a series of options, now I can say, I'm going to consider these based on the merits or the facts of the different options involved, but they're going to be informed by my core values, my principles, and my ideals. And if you do that, it's more likely that you'll end up with a sound and wise decision. Now, it may not be that you end up exactly in the way that you wanted, but at least it's informed by something with substance. Now, of course, other things will creep in. You'll have extrinsic pressures, like your friends telling you what to do, or this audience telling Jane what to do, or mentors telling you something, or your family. And then things that are inside yourself, like maybe you have a legacy that you're trying to uphold, or maybe you're afraid of success or failure, or maybe you're a perfectionist. And when we're trying to make a choice about the future, it's complicated, obviously, because predicting the future is hard, and it's hard because we rarely have all the information we want. We always have imperfect information. And so you're making a decision based on as much information as you can gather, but not all of it. And on top of which, once you make your choice, the world doesn't care, it just keeps happening. And so the world is constantly changing as you are making your decisions. So it's hard to pick the right thing to do. But this is how decision-making usually happens. It's not like what I just showed. Typically, we haven't given a lot of thought to who we are and what we value. Instead, we look immediately to the substance of the matter. How much am I going to get paid? Is it in California, New York, or Louisiana? And you make decisions based on those facts or merits of the individual case. Of course, all these other things creep in, like our pressures and our lack of clear information, and this leaves us feeling a bit adrift at sea, not knowing exactly what to do, and it creates a lot of analysis paralysis. And what we end up with is a shaky decision. We're hoping for the best, but the reason it's maybe not as good as that could be is because back there, lurking in the background, are those core values, principles, and ideals. So I've spent some time suggesting that when we're making decisions, before we get to the point of making that complex decision, like what career do I want for myself, or what job do I want, what fellowship I'm going to pick, start first with who am I and what do I value. So you might say, well, what does that mean? What is a value? I'm just going to show you on this slide values that make me up. And because values are all individual, I can't show you your values, and I can't show you Jane's values, I can just show you mine. And if you want to manipulate me, it's very easy. All you have to do is take a photograph of this slide and just convince me that you're working on one of these platforms, and I'm going to go right along with you. Because this is basically how I try to make my decisions. These are things that I believe is like core to my identity. I believe that life has value. I believe that other people come first. I believe we should always tell the truth, that strife has failed diplomacy. We should address what we can control, that we're a long way from perfection, that effort trumps talent and alliances trump aggression, that wealth is a means and not an end. I should know the truth of the matter, but I should focus on the positives, and I should do the right thing. So when I'm confronted with a decision, I'm going to plug those values into that decision-making process, and it makes it easier for me to make a decision that feels right to me. So if I take these values and plug them into these very basic things here across the academic spectrum, which is where I work, I can say, well, if I'm making decisions about clinical care specifically, and someone comes to bother me about something or asks me a question, I can say, well, if the building's not on fire, it can wait, because one of my core values is that patients come first. I do answer clinical emails at 11 p.m. because, again, patients come first. And for me, that's not a burden or a thing that causes me burnout. That's actually something that's intrinsic to my character, and so I actually like doing that. So when people talk about being burned out in their job, what often that's caused by is a conflict between your value structure and what you're actually being asked to do. If there's synergy between your value structure and what you're being asked to do, even if you're working long hours, it doesn't bother you as much because you're doing the thing that is who you are. From a research and publication standpoint, I personally only see two reasons to ever publish a paper. One is to meaningfully improve healthcare, and two is to develop a person. Lengthening a CV, for me, is never a good reason to publish a paper. From an educational standpoint, I have unlimited time for trainees unless it interferes with patient care, because my value structure puts them first. What I teach today is going to affect thousands of lives in the future, and it's my responsibility to own a problem if somebody is struggling, because if I just let that person go out into the wilderness and struggle, all the harm they cause is kind of partly my fault. From an administrative standpoint, I do the work on the administrative side on behalf of other people. Many people are relying on me, so my primary responsibility is the people I serve, and a CV is never a good reason to take a job. So these thoughts are just my value structures being informed of how I behave or think about my job. And you can have your own values, and you can plug them into your own framework of how you pursue things. So let's go back to Jane here for a second. So far, all we know about Jane's situation is a few facts about the offer, which you were able to comment on, and a brief sketch of her very stellar CV. But a more relevant question for Jane is, what are your core values, what are your principles, and what are your ideals? And nobody can answer that except for Jane. And without that knowledge, the decision that she's making about her job is transactional and less likely to achieve long-term synergy or meaning for her. And hopefully your career will be a long and fruitful and successful one. If you don't consider these things, you're going to have a harder time having a lovely life. If Jane is afraid about certain things, why is she afraid? It's likely that fear is a reflection of a core value that's lurking underneath somewhere, nervous it's about to be ignored. So identify your core values and expressly consider them. So maybe Jane is thinking to herself, one of my core values is I put other lives first. I'm an altruist and an optimist. I'm here to serve others. And if that's one of her core values, that should influence the kind of job that she takes. If Jane's feeling torn, she's likely being influenced by a combination of internal and external pressures. It's unlikely that it's just the merits of each option that are identical. It's usually that there's pressures involved. It's more likely the weights of the different factors are unclear because the priorities have yet to be filtered through her core principles. So whether RVU productivity, how much money she makes, her vacation time, how many patients she gets to serve, how much patient contact she has, how important each of those things are depend on what she values. So how could she possibly make an informed choice without knowing what she values first? So openly identify the pressures that are steering your decision making. And let's say in this context, Jane is saying, my mom's legacy is affecting my thinking here. She kind of always wanted me to do this job that's being described. I'm being pushed in that direction, maybe not because I want to do it, but because I feel there's this legacy pushing me in that direction. She should openly acknowledge that and consider it. Is Jane certain she's considered all the available options? I just gave you, one example of a job and 4 people who asked her to consider a job, but those are all academic archetypes. There's literally a million possibilities for Jane that don't follow a typical or expected path. So when you're given an option to consider, don't just rely on the fact that you were given it today and it's like, well, I guess that's my only choice. Innovate options and avoid false choices. Broaden the pie, create more slices of that pie. So maybe Jane's thinking, when I was working in Nairobi, there was a clear need for radiologists with GI expertise. So maybe that's something I should do instead. So another way to phrase all this stuff that I'm saying is when someone tells you this is how to be successful, that statement actually has no inherent meaning to it because the definition of success is individual and based on what you care about. So to illustrate that point, we have one more audience response question for you to consider. How will you know when you are successful? My family is smiling, my bank accounts are bursting, my retirement is solidified, my parents are cared for, my research has changed healthcare, trainees have surpassed my skills, I have national recognition, I've saved too many lives to count, or you don't like my list. Perfect. So I think there's a couple observations we can make about this. First is that we didn't all pick the same thing, right? So it's not like one bar has all the answers in it. Each person has their own opinion about what it is for them to be successful. So when someone comes to you and says, if you want to be successful, you have to do X, Y, and Z, I want you to consider this graph. Remember that not everyone defines it the same way. The second thing I'd point out is look how many people picked that my family is smiling. That's a really important thing. So we didn't even talk about whether Jane has a family or whether their family's interests are discordant from what she's considering. So if her priority was she wants her family to be smiling and they have no interest in living in Nairobi, that would be a relevant point to consider. And then there are many people who think my list is not long enough. So thank you. So what do you think Jane's answer would be if we were to ask her that question? And how might her answer influence her decision making? I'm going to illustrate this concept in this way. This is a picture of someone walking a path up toward a volcano. Let's say that that's Jane. And let's say that success is that volcano. And success, as it's conventionally described, is by these people. These people are all walking towards the volcano also, and they are sources of good advice. So if Jane wants to know how to walk towards the volcano, she should just ask those people because they're going the same place. But what if Jane's core values are telling her that really my goal was over here? My idea of success is this direction, so she's wanting to walk over here. Well, if that's the case, if she's asking for advice, those people walking toward the volcano, she's going to get honest advice from a good place, but it's going to be misguided. So think about that. When someone says, this is how you be successful, I want you to ask them, what are your criteria for that? And consider yourself. Does that apply to you? If you never define success for yourself, you risk a couple of things. You risk taking the wrong path. You risk taking an inefficient path. You risk living with indecision. If you define success ignoring your core values, you risk burnout, which is a consequence of moral injury to you, chronic malaise, and perhaps a lifetime of regret if you don't course correct. So if we think about this in the concept of strategic thinking, this is Jane's current state where she's trying to decide what to do. If she has no intentional thought about shaping her future path, she's going to end up, through the natural flow of events without intervention, in some unplanned outcome. If she's going to engage in a strategic plan for herself, where she's going to allocate her decision-making thoughtfully, her idea of success is going to be labeled and put up here, and she's going to have a path of intentional action that takes her towards a place that she knows she's going to be happy. And on that path, she's going to identify certain things that say, these are preset milestones that let me know I'm headed in the right direction. So let's say she ends up deciding she wants to go to Nairobi. She needs to make sure that she has certification, so allows her to actually practice in that place. So she's going to make sure, well, by this month and this year, I need to make sure that that's lined up. I need to make sure that I sell my house by this date, just like if you're planning a turkey dinner for Thanksgiving. No difference. And of course, your path is going to probably take a meandering shape over time. It's never just so simple as a straight line. I'm going to close with something a little weird, so just bear with me here. I wrote an article talking about how to make career decisions, and it has kind of flowery language in it, and I'm just going to read part of it to you. And on the screen, I'm going to show you some art. Just get pensive and think about it as I'm reading to you. So, why do our life choices hurt? When mentoring people and colleagues through major career decisions, this is a frequent discussion point. Someone says, but I just don't know what to do. And we wrestle with our choices, we twist them into ethereal knots, and then finally a pressure, which is usually time, forces our hand and we decide. And the relief at that unwinding soon gives way to grief, which works its necessary stages and then finally resolves. And all parts of this mental writhing exact a toll. There is torment in differentiation, and we feel it in our souls as pieces of the possible are plucked from our breast and vaporized. With every path that dissipates, we become less pluripotential. We are not regenerating stem cells. We are red blood cells with a circulating half-life, and we weren't born yesterday. I think we struggle with these decisions because our unconscious knows this. It knows that the choices we make demand a permanent sacrifice. You can do what you want, but I'm going to take a part of you forever. And these decisions jail options from us, and this makes us sad. But we were only always ever going to be one person, not the multiverse of endless possibilities we might have imagined for ourselves. Our youthful immortality was in many ways a lie. We are finite, and we are singular, and we will die. And the past do not continue forever, and we only get one line. And the more I'm privileged to witness the agonizing decision-making of other people, the more I've come to believe the choices we make are generally a struggle between what we know is right for ourselves and what pressure is telling us to do. Echoes of a paternal influence, a childhood dream, an overzealous mentor, residual inertia from a once taken but misbegotten path. Choosing what we know is right kills a thing that we cherish or acknowledges a past mistake. Siding with pressure sacrifices what is best. Rarely is it a complete unknown or a random throw of the dice. Usually we know the sides. What we struggle to do is select which piece of us to end. So when sorting out challenging career decisions of my own, or when talking with those who are experiencing this, maybe you, this is the approach that I take. I think we have to recognize that this is not easy, and rarely is a decision being made solely on the basis of facts. We should learn which options are likely best personally and which are being influenced by internal and external pressures. We should acknowledge and explicitly describe them. If the best personal option is not clear, we should discover it by uncovering core values and aligning those values with the options that are available. Understand the interests motivating the decision and learn why it is being forced if that's not immediately obvious. Innovate options not originally under consideration and avoid false dichotomies or false choices. Realize that every decision brings loss because parts of your identity, whether they're imagined or real, are being sacrificed. Loss brings grieving, and this requires preemptive attention. Much of the pain in personal decision-making is here, not in the facts that separate the choices. I can't be everything. All choices I make restrict my future, and decisions sacrifice a part of me. And the beginning of my tale cannot be unwritten, so the question I have to ask myself is, how will I choose it to end? And it's in my power to make a conscious choice about what I want my future to look like. Erasure of hypothetical futures is searing because it acknowledges things we will not be. Differentiation is a stark reminder of mortality. And although we might revisit the choices of our past, that visitation is often an illusion. Time moves relentlessly forward. Decisions are the opportunities in life to affirm who we are. I am a doctor. My life is what I make of it. It's the sum of my decisions, and my choices mirror core values. If I can only be one person, the person I am will represent the values that form me. That's all I have for you. Thank you very much.